Thijs, welcome to Future Speak.
They've been creating these e-learnings for decades, but not really from a user-centered perspective. They've been creating courses because they needed to, because it was asked from legal or compliance, or it had a business procedure that everybody needed to know. But they weren't asking the employees, hey, what do you want?
We came across one another at Unleash earlier on this year, but didn't get the chance to talk last year, now. You know how interested I am in the world of virtual reality. We talk about it so much, but we actually haven't made it a reality, excuse the pun. So I'd love to know your thoughts on where we're going in terms of the workforce and the future of work, which is here now, and more about what you do. But before we get into it, I'd love you to introduce yourself to the viewers and listeners today.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me on this series. Very excited. I'm Thijs de Vries, one of the founders of Warp VR, a business we founded a little bit over 5 years ago. My background is really in learning, changing behavior, but always applied from a gamification perspective. So I studied design, always with kind of psychology as kind of a factor within design. Always curious on why people would think products would be very interesting, like what's the emotional connections people can have with products. And I came kind of in the world of games, and I realized that that's the case there as well. Like, people can really get into games; they get emotionally attached to games. So, and I was wondering, like, can we grab that motivation, let's say, that gamers have, and put that into a different context? So that's kind of what I did. Also, for many years before this venture, really helping clients, bigger, smaller companies, with applying game-based principles, game-based learning often within their organizations. And then, let's say 6, maybe 7 years ago, I came across VR as a technology. Yeah, obviously I knew it, but we were doing this for a project back in the day. And I was fascinated absolutely by this technology, and that combination of game-based learning, of motivation and design, and VR as a technology, I thought was very powerful. So that's when we founded Warp VR, myself and 2 other co-founders, always with the intent of trying almost to democratize VR, let's say, trying to make it as easy as possible for clients in order to get into VR and really work with VR, but never have VR kind of being the centerpiece, because eventually the employee is the center. So not the technology. Technology is just the means to an end, but really trying to kind of build it up in such a way that we can, truly use this technology in a good manner in order to create more impact. So impact, eventually for clients, obviously, but also really impact for the employee itself. And I think we're doing a good job there. So fast forward until now, got some amazing clients we work with, many training scenarios that have been developed. So we're definitely seeing, that uptake of VR within the future of work.
Tell us more about the reality. I'd love to hear more, because you and I have had a conversation, and I'm sure that we're typical in this, which is we're interested in it. We really like where it's going. Obviously, it'll never replace the human, but I love the immersiveness of it. Just as we were talking before we hit record today, being able to be away and really focus on our podcast and, prep well for our guests and make sure it's a wonderful experience both for our guests and our listeners, means we can immerse ourselves in this whilst we're doing it. This kind of training and coaching is no different, is it? But it's that grappling with the reality of, I like it, to let's make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, looking at immersion and kind of what it means, I think it can be achieved in many ways. So, VR is just a kind of a tool in order to get there. A bit like a podcast, for instance, wearing your headphones, maybe walking around the city, having a podcast on. I mean, that could really be immersive. You could really be into that story, almost forget about anything else. I mean, there's eventually the definition, that you step into almost kind of a new reality, kind of a new world, where, something happens. And VR as a technology is kind of a technology which does this really well. I mean, eventually this is what we're seeing over and over again, that whenever employees are putting on a VR headset, they're there. I mean, within seconds, they're there, and it's going to be super difficult to ask them any other question because they won't be able to answer. They're immersed in that new world. The vision is obviously completely changed. Whenever they wear headphones, they're even more immersed. And you kind of need your full brain power, right, in order to be there, to experience, whatever happens there, and to interact with it. And I think that's the power of VR. And in the end, it's also true what you're saying when it comes to the application. I mean, VR is very well suited for immersion and bringing people into realities which are, maybe otherwise too dangerous to go to or too difficult to experience. But it's just one technology, it's one methodology in a bigger mix of whatever you have to give to your employees. So kind of the offline interactions, I mean, nothing can replace that. So you still need that. You need classroom sessions, you probably need e-learning, and you need VR. So it's really that mix, I think, that blended approach, which eventually would work best for any employee in any situation.
Can you bring that to life for us? Is someone listening to this right now who is really bought into this and is, walking along, to your point, they're taking a walk in the city, right? They've got their AirPods in and they're kind of thinking, yep, I get this. So I get the e-learning, I get the VR, I get the in-person. Now what? Talk to us more about, say, some of the scenarios that you've seen and how you've helped organizations.
Yes, obviously. I'd love doing that. Important to mention here is also kind of the angle, let's say, that we are taking when it comes to VR. I mean, VR as a technology can be used, but the way you use that technology can be in different ways. We are currently also seeing this happening, and this is kind of a maturity of the market as well, where clients understand, okay, for this type of training topics, I need kind of VR in such a way. For others, we do VR different. The angle that we're in and kind of the approach that we're taking is from stories, from narrative. So actually what we're doing with our clients is that we're creating these almost interactive documentaries where you as a player, wearing the VR headset, are actually the main character in that story. So you put on the headset, you are playing as someone, maybe you're playing as yourself. You could be an operational employee on a work site, but you could also be a sales representative in an office. I mean, it could be anything. You are somewhere and you have to do something. And people come up to you in that story. So we use video in order to do this, right? So we use 360 video, we use actors, and there would be interaction. So something would happen. So the topics that we're seeing this used in is soft skills, for one, sales training, leadership training, communication more in general, how to give feedback, all those kinds of elements. So really, how do you interact with colleagues, clients, prospects? What kind of questions do you ask? What do you do? If things get a little bit stressful, it's difficult to approach somebody. Like, what does that do to yourself? And the other topic that we see is safety and security. And I think that makes a lot of sense for a lot of people, since, VR can make sure that, you get access to these scenarios, which otherwise in reality would be difficult to get access to. So, evacuation exercise because the building is on fire. I mean, obviously everybody is dealing with these exercises in real life, but yeah, we know the building isn't on fire, so everybody walks out of the building pretty calm. Everybody knows it's an exercise, so you won't really remember what you're currently learning there. You don't really remember that protocol that's being created in order to get everybody out safely. And you don't remember it because you don't connect it to a emotion. Because whenever that would really happen, that's an emotional impact. Like, it's an impactful, stressful situation. And then you probably fight, flight, or freeze, right? I mean, your primary instinct would be to handle in a certain way. But if you've experienced this before and you've got into that stressful situation, you can connect whatever you learn, and you can connect that procedure leaving the office building in a safe manner, you can connect that to the emotion, and you've been there before. So this I think this is really this is also coming from research, where research is telling that confidence levels, for instance, are increasing whenever people are trained with VR opposed to e-learnings or classroom learnings. And it's really that emotional connection that makes sure that happens. So that angle of story-based learning, that's really the angle that we are taking, and can be applied within soft skills, safety, security kind of topics. And we help clients in order to create those. So hopefully that gives a little bit more of an insight on the types of training scenarios that we create.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I love your point there actually around bringing these scenarios to life. When I think back to recent fire alarms, even a fire alarm whilst I was last here, you're right. We all very calmly walked out the building and shut down our laptops and took our bags with us, even though we were told not to, because we didn't know how long we would be out there for.
Exactly.
It's a really different scenario because you know you're safe.
Exactly.
And we all behave differently, don't we, when the adrenaline's running and everything else. And gosh, I remember a few Christmases ago, a friend's son had VR headsets, and it was all to do with diving and diving right down. Now, I'm very comfortable in water, but we were diving really deep and there were sharks around us and we were in a cage. And I felt that emotion, even though I was sat on my friend's bed, I was safe. There were a group of us in the room, all the lights were on, nothing was going to happen to me. But that experience was real.
True.
So having that is incredibly powerful. How do you see this evolving? What's next for you and your organization and how you work with clients?
Yeah, so really what we're seeing is kind of the increase in demand for this. And then I think this is really due to the fact that there are more use cases, more successful use cases of applying VR within organizations. So the pandemic obviously also, helps there, where pre-pandemic people knew about VR, knew potentially about kind of the benefits, but it was such a step forward. You really have to make time in order to do this. You have to put resources in there. Also during pandemic, everything is stressful, is difficult. You're not really going to innovate when it comes to kind of these new technologies. But definitely right now, post-pandemic, we see an increase in demand for VR training, because within kind of the hybrid work decade probably we're in, you kind of need these technologies in order to bring kind of these situations to people instead of the other way around. Like we always used to bring employees to certain situations in order to train them there, and often not that realistic. And now you can bring that situation to people themselves. So wherever they are, maybe they're working from home, or also with kind of the more remote hybrid way of working, it's so much easier to attract talent from around the globe. So it's going to be more widespread on the people that you're working for you. So VR as a technology can definitely help there. And for us, it's a little bit twofold. So we are a technology company. We build technology in order to create these VR trainings, and on the other hand, we're also a company that has to provide in this, let's say, almost thought leadership. Like, how do you apply VR? What is VR? When does it work? When doesn't it work? What's the cost, for instance? When it's what's the ROI when using VR? So we really have to talk about this a lot in order also to kind of educate almost, because this is really what we're seeing. So for a lot of our clients, it's early days, they start with VR more as a pilot project or as an experiment, as an innovation. But we also always see that employees are super excited about this, so they get trained on a topic which really matters to them, which they see value in. And, then they take off the headset and they're like, then we can do this, and we can do this topic, and we can do this topic. So, the inspiration comes. And for us, that's really a sign that, this is getting bigger. More companies will start, train people, give people these experiences in VR. because currently at the moment there's nothing else which can bring you so close to reality as VR can. So that's definitely the kind of the future that we're seeing ahead of ourselves.
You raise an interesting point there, and that's when potential clients are talking to you about return on investment. How do you address that?
It's a question we are actually trying to get on the table as early as possible, because eventually, what we've seen as well, to be honest, is this was more before the pandemic, I think, where VR was being used purely as an innovation, as in, we want to see what it is, we're going to invest some time, some resources, some budget in it, and we'll see. And that really doesn't work. I mean, eventually, if you put it there as an innovation, yes, it's fun for a couple of months, but then, it dies down. It doesn't work. So we've learned that, from the earliest stages of also the sales process, we need to talk about ROI. We need to talk about commitment. We need to talk about implementation. And eventually, if you look at ROI, it's a little bit different from case to case. So most of the clients that we work with are big enterprises. For some of these clients, they work with, very big and expensive assets. We've got KLM working with aircrafts. We've got the Dutch railways, working with big trains. These need to be operational. These need to be working in the field. Otherwise, the company doesn't make any money. There's no revenue, and training becomes even more of a cost driver than it already is. So the ROI for these type of cases is actually super easy to create. Because, just as an example, for the Dutch railways, for instance, they currently train their people, all kinds of staff on the introduction of new train types. Whereas normally they would bring people to the train. So they would order, one train that's kind of a model, so to say, and they would guide everybody through that train, where everything is, how everything works. It would normally cost them 2 full working days in order to do this. And if you would do that with all of your staff, that requires an amazing amount of days. Currently, they're doing this in VR, and they can, right now already, cut down, the training time in half, because we can bring the train to the employees instead of the employees to the train. And then the ROI is easy to create, because, the amount of time required from all of these employees to be trained, if you can cut that in half, I mean, that's freeing up budget, a lot. So, and it's pretty easy to create kind of these VR training scenarios within these boundaries.
Yeah, and I get that. It's interesting. I read about a study that was done a while back, a few years ago, and they had 2 groups. So Group A was taught to play a tune on a piano with a physical piano, right? The others, Group B, were taught how to play a song on a piano without being there. And forgive me, I can't remember if that was done via VR, but the end result was there was no difference between Group A and Group B. So what you're saying there really resonates with me when you talk about that, and that cost saving of time makes so much sense. Because we are now spread all over the place.
Absolutely.
The practicalities of this, in terms of the hardware itself, right now, it's a case of, you put a helmet on and you're immersed in that world. Where do you see that side of it going? Will we maintain this visual impact here, or will it move on to something else?
It's a good question, and eventually it's a difficult one to answer, in that sense that, one side, technology moves fast. We've got these headsets. I've got a Quest 2 here, for instance, from Meta, a great device at the moment. Clients use this, in terms of price quality, it's perfect for VR training. They recently launched the Quest Pro, which is a bit more an expensive device. Quality terms a lot better than the Quest 2, and this will move forward. So eventually you will gonna see better devices, better quality, as happens with digital hardware. But it's also, I guess, important that this whole technology and hardware evolves in a direction where it's less, I would say, that bulky, or at least less obvious. Because eventually that's also important to really make it mainstream. And that's only going to happen, whenever VR headsets, let's say, are as light as, the glasses I'm currently wearing, for instance. And it could definitely go into that direction, but it will take time. So in the meantime, really what we're seeing currently with clients is that no client is gonna